Test 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Test for police community commission meeting. Yeah, you did. 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. And everybody, when you talk into these microphones about this far away, if you would. So if you're like this, it's not going to work. And don't do that. Don't do that.
You actually sound very well.
May I?
No, I'm not saying.
Okay.
This is when nobody's talking.
But I like to sit next to you.
Right?
Yeah.
What can we do about this?
It went away now, right? It's going
Oh.
away.
Nah, it's still there.
You
It
still-
sounds like an air conditioner's on.
Yeah.
A condenser, just like.
You know what we could do? So it's not better now. You still hear it? When I'm
It's still there.
test 2 3.
Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yes, Vice Chair Carpenter. The meeting's being recorded. Thank you, Vice Chair Carpenter. Commissioner Castillo-Lawton?
Here.
Commissioner Goransky? Commissioner Mejia?
Present.
Commissioner Perea?
Present.
Commissioner Said?
Here, thank you.
Vice Chair Carpenter?
Here.
Chair Vega? Noting for the record, Chair Vega is absent. 6 members present. You have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And Commissioner Said, would you please lead us?
Hand over your heart, ready to begin. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments? Anyone that wishes to speak?
Vice Chair Carpenter, we do not have any speakers for this meeting.
Thank you. All righty, since that is completed, I guess we can move on to our agenda, which is going to be our training session, correct? Or do we have staff reports we need to do first? Am I screwing up here? My apologies, folks. So are we ready to bring in the training?
Do we need to,
I'm sorry, I probably missed something here. My apologies.
do we need to approve minutes from?
Oh, yep, there we go.
Good
Oh.
point, thank you. Thank you, Madam Recording Secretary.
Are we ready to begin? All right, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I am happy to be here. It's so nice when I get the opportunity to come out and actually sit in the same room with board members and commissioners. And so thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. And just know that I'm happy to be here and appreciate the work that you all are doing as commissioners for Santa Ana and Oversight in general. I am going to, let's see, I think I'm trying to go back to the initial meeting that we had back in April 12th, earlier this year. And so just as a refresher, here's what we covered, and that was a virtual meeting. Okay, I'm not gonna go over any of that, but just wanted to kind of refresh your mind to, and also help myself remember what we did. And so for tonight, here are the topics I will cover: community engagement and outreach, transparency and reporting practices, establishing expectations, building legitimacy and carrying out board responsibilities, and identifying and addressing challenges and opportunities. And I do want to start off by saying I'm going to unload a lot of information on you tonight. Don't feel overwhelmed. That is not what I want to happen. Just keep in mind that the information that I'm sharing with you, I understand at this point in time you're not staffed, not fully staffed, and so I think a good way to look at this training is information that is foundational and helpful for you all to know. So as you're moving forward and when you are staffed, you all will have an idea of where you might want to go. For example, some of the things that you'll see in community engagement and outreach, if there are certain activities or events that spark your interest, that's something you can think about, and then during your regular meetings or subcommittee meetings, you can have discussions about those. But just keep in mind, I know you're not fully staffed, so please don't feel overwhelmed with all that I'm about to show you and feel like you've got to do it all right here, right now, as soon as possible. All right, so I am going to start with community engagement and outreach. And when I think of community, or when a lot of us think of community and oversight, of course we think of the citizens of a city, but we also, with NACOL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, we also think of other stakeholders in the community as well. So we have our police departments, our nonprofit agencies, religious institutions. So for brevity, in the sake of brevity tonight, when I do speak of community, just know that I'm thinking of all of the different segments of the community. However, some of them will be very specific to the general public, to citizens. And so that's where a lot of civilian oversight agencies do focus their outreach and engagement efforts in a different way than they do with law enforcement or city government officials, municipal officials, and those sorts of segments of the community. So just with that in mind, I do want to start with just very generally what we think of when we talk about community engagement and civilian oversight. And real quick, I know you all are fairly new. You're not staffed yet. Have you all done any type of community engagement at this point in time? And it's okay if you haven't, because you're not staffed and you're fairly new. All right, so think of this as you get going and the work begins and you have staff in place, these are the things, some of the things that you might want to consider or think about or actually do in the long run. All right, so of course, here are 4 different ways or factors that we think of when we talk about community engagement. I'm going to get to a slide on each of these, or a couple of slides in some cases. But of course, we know that civilian oversight commissions and boards are public bodies, and so they do meet open meeting laws, public meeting laws, which you all are well aware of. And so two-way communication. Oftentimes we first think about how can we relay information as oversight professionals or practitioners, how can information come about what you're doing out into the community? But the two-way communication is important as well, right? Because you always want to be able to get feedback, input from the community. And so it's got to be two-way when you're dealing with oversight in your positions. Regular updates. This is regular updates, particularly with the public, since by virtue of what you do, you are a representative or the voice of the public in many cases, or the conduit between city government or the law enforcement agency and your board, okay? So regular updates to the community that you are serving. And then the public presence. Where at all possible, when possible, it's beneficial to have your citizens in Santa Ana to be involved in oversight. If it's providing input, you're providing them information, but having them involved as much as possible is pretty critical. Okay. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each of these things. Open meetings. You all have been doing this for some time now, or you've had some meetings, and so you know how this goes. Public comment periods are really important when it comes to your meetings, and so the more people know about what you're doing, and when you do start reviewing cases and getting into a groove with the work that you will be doing as commissioners, then oftentimes the public will be involved. You may have more people sign up to speak, and so this is a critical way that the community can provide input or express themselves about something happening in the community or about the work that you're doing yourself as a commission.
I have a question before
Yes.
we move forward. So I really appreciate that you brought up what community means and what it looks like, because I think that it can be a lot of things, right? As you mentioned, nonprofits, different departments that we're engaging. So I have 2 questions that I'm curious as to whether you have the answer. One, what have you seen when, what have other oversight commissions done when the commissioners themselves have maybe divisive ideological views of who the community is? And how do you come together to work together, right? So for example, I'm curious of your thoughts about what other commissions do, because how you think of who community is so impactful in how you're going to navigate and move forward with any activities. So I think before that, there should be consensus about that. And so what do you do when some commissioners view that the community needs more policing when this is an oversight commission? And I'm curious to see whether that's something that other oversight commissions have navigated and how they problem solved. In terms of how do you ensure that when everyone's speaking about what community means and who you're representing, that there's consensus on that?
Well, okay, so if there's not a consensus on what community is, then there has to be conversation among those disagreeing. And if there are representatives, or if there are certain segments of the community that are kind of the leaders, whether it's unofficial or official leaders of differing opinions, then if there's an opportunity to bring everyone into the same room, the official or unofficial leaders, and have an open discussion about what it is, where the diverging ideas, and what is causing those differences. When I think of community, I just described what we think of community when we're talking about civilian oversight from the perspective of NACOLE. It's all members of the segments of a community. And so there has to be open discussion. If there's not an agreement ultimately about who are members of the community or the definition of community, then it may come to a point where everyone at the table agrees to disagree. Even if that is the case, and ultimately that is what happens, when it comes to oversight, everyone has to be, or should be, keeping in mind what are the mandates of oversight. Why are you here? What is it that you're mandated to do? Because everyone, we all come from different walks of life. We all have different ideologies about certain things. We may share a lot of the same things, and there may be more agreement among us than differences. But we're all gonna have our own individual ideas about certain things, right? We're human beings. So when that's the case, rather than getting stuck and digging in to where you stand or what your belief is, because that's not going to help with what we're attempting to do with civilian oversight or improving police-community relations in a community. It's okay to disagree. Keep your eyes on what the mandates are that you're tasked with, because that's going to be the same regardless what your beliefs are. Now, if there is something going on within a commission that is preventing you all from fulfilling a mandate that is detrimental to the work that you're doing, then that actually might become a different type of, require a different type of resolution. It may be something that, once you have a director, that is something that if there are diverging viewpoints to the point that they are prohibiting the work that the commission has to do, that's going to have to be resolved. Otherwise, the work is not going to get done. And coming up a little later, one of the later modules is about legitimacy. And so if you lose legitimacy in the eyes of the public or in the eyes of some of your stakeholders that you're working with, you're creating a bigger hole for yourself. And it can take a lot of time to regain that legitimacy. So also keeping in mind, as public meetings, what you're discussing, if there's internal strife, if the public is aware of that, if it is painfully clear that there's some internal strife among the board and some tension, then that can feed into losing your legitimacy. And so that's something that you don't want to happen. I don't know if I'm answering that fully right now.
No, I think that was helpful.
Okay, okay,
And
yeah.
how we answered the question, I think we might answer it.
Okay, yeah. And please, yes, feel free to interrupt me if you have a question or even a comment about anything I'm addressing. All right. Of course, projected content, printed materials, not only just for the ease of seeing everything, but also people with visual impairments, hearing impairments. It's always helpful to have materials that you're using throughout your meetings in different formats, different languages if possible, just as accessible as possible. Online streaming, you all do that. Most oversight bodies do that today. There are a few that actually will air their meetings on community TV as well, or public TV. Don't see that as much, but it is still being done in a few places. One of the things that some boards and commissions I work with have done or do on a regular basis is they hold their meetings in different locations throughout the city. Sometimes at a church, sometimes at a community center. But the idea behind that is the recognition that the public can't always easily perhaps get to the usual meeting place. And so every once in a while, there's an attempt to, it's kind of community outreach, right? Have meetings within a community that might have difficulty getting to the usual meeting place and time. And then this depends on budget and resources, but if there's any types of foods, even if it's water, but something available for people who do want to attend the meeting in person, and if they're aware that there's some kind of food, or, you know, these are right after work hours for a lot of people, and so it's always helpful to have some kind of a little help, a little refreshment. I know not everyone can do this, and that's the same with childcare. There are a few communities that actually provide childcare for citizens who would like to attend the meetings while the meetings are in session. Okay, so communication, conveying information. So conveying information, remember I talked about two-way communication. So I look at conveying information as information coming from commissions and boards out to the general public or the community and other stakeholders. So of course, websites are super helpful. Most oversight bodies have a website, and it varies what is on the websites. Those that have been around for quite some time and they have the staffing to help keep the website updated, there's a ton of information, and I'm going to show you some screenshots or some examples when we get to the reporting sections. But on the website, at the very least, there should be your ordinance. It's helpful to have contact information about your meeting time, your meeting place, of course, your agenda, and any resources you make available for the meeting. And also, once you get going, people like to see, the public likes to see who their commission members are, who the commissioners are. So if there's a brief bio, even a photo about each of the members, that always goes over well for the public. When you start getting into the work, any checklists you might be using to review cases, if you have handbooks that you're using, any resources that you have, any reports that you come up with, making those available on the website so that they're easily accessible is always helpful to the public and other stakeholders. Email list. If you have an email list where meeting dates and times are sent out, of course that information is typically on the website for oversight bodies, but also being proactive about getting information out to people and keeping them on an email list can be helpful. Social media, word about social media. If you all choose to go this route, the oversight bodies that do this are very careful about who controls or has the ability to post. It's not going to be every single commission member. If they're staffing, when the staffing is in place, that may be something they do. And we advise oversight entities to stay away from controversial topics. We think of social media for oversight bodies as a way to convey information and educational information, not about opinions or ideas or thoughts about some political hot button issue or an incident that has happened in the community. We think of it more as information sharing and educating. News outlets.
I have a question on the social media. Do you suggest that, because it's different, I don't think we have the staff, I don't think we have the staff capacity to have like a social media specifically for the commission to do updates, am I right? Yeah. So in that case, I think one thing that I have done, that I do is I have a social media that is just for updates on the commission, that is not my personal. So I'm curious if that's common, or if you have recommendations on like how to navigate that to prevent, controversial things that can arise.
When you say you have an account, it's not the city's, it's not your personal.
I have an account.
Uh-huh.
I guess it could be considered my personal because it's not the city's, but I don't use it as a personal account. I just do it as
Just for
updates.
oversight.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just advise, if you're doing it to get information about the oversight or your commission, then stick with fact-based information. Not opinions, anything that might be controversial, because that will come back on the commission.
So anything that would be controversial, and I'm asking this because this has been something that we've discussed before, and I think a lot of us have questions and still seeking clarity sometimes. So because of the way social media, you're right, it depends on which platform. So let's use Instagram for an example. So let's use Instagram as an example. And so you have your username, right? And then you could use your name or not. And then you can put there a personal account or for the commission. should we be explicitly stating that? Because if we have a title as commissioner, which I don't have there currently, then I assume that even though that is not using any of the Santa Ana city, right, users, that it would still fall within that framework of official account, if that makes sense, correct? So we have to be mindful, if it says commissioner, then that means despite us not having an official email from the city, that is becoming an official account.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are, especially some of the smaller communities I work with, or the newer ones, but particularly the smaller communities, they don't have an email account that is assigned by the city. So they do end up creating, oftentimes they create, somewhere in the email itself, it's very clear that it's commissioner or board member so-and-so, but it'll be gmail.com afterwards. So, despite not having a city assigned email address, you're still representing the city if that's what you're doing, and you're identifying yourself as a commissioner or board member, yes. So, and by controversial, I mean, like, I'm thinking more opinions, or if there's an incident that has happened in your community, and even this, I would say, even if this goes, if you have a personal social media account and you make a comment on it, keep in mind that people will know, if they're aware of Oversight and what's happening in Santa Ana with Oversight, that you're a commissioner. So, again, I can't tell you, no one can tell you what to do in your personal life. I would say follow whatever legal advice is from the city about posting, but if it's from a personal account, people know you're a commissioner, it will still come back to the commission. And so that goes into the idea of legitimacy of you all as commissioners and as a body as a whole. And so when we get to legitimacy, I can't stress enough how important it is to always keep the idea of being a legitimate body or entity in the forefront of all the work that you do. Because whether the community, if they perceive something, even if it's not true, then that can take a hit on your legitimacy. If you have a hit on your legitimacy, it may affect the community support that you have. If that takes a hit, then it can be a little more challenging to get things done. When you have community support, you're viewed as a legitimate body, it goes a long way. And so I will stress that over and over, and talk more about it when we get to that section of tonight's training.
And I'd like to just make a few points. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tina, but I think what Tina is trying to convey the message in a lot of this, because we are obviously subject to very local law and California law. I think what Tina is trying to relay is kind of best practices, right? So while you may not necessarily be restricted under California law from conveying your opinion on your social media platform, I think what Tina is trying to convey is sometimes a best practices perspective may dictate that maybe you don't, because of legitimacy or because of, perceptions of bias or what have you. Kind of conversations we've had in the past, either in the open forum of the meetings, or I've had conversations with many of you in my office regarding these things. So I think understand, if the question is going to relate to what does California law mandate, what does California law or local law restrict, that would be a better question for me to either address here or separately by email or in my office hours, something like that. But I think Tina's really doing a great job conveying a best practices aspect of what she has observed over the course of her training and experience with many other cities, and potentially pitfalls that other commissions have found themselves in with regard to social media and a lot of the other topics that she's going to address tonight. So that was with regard to that. With regard to, I wanted to just bring up again the email address concept and whether it's city issued. We did touch on this early on in training, that it does not matter whether your email address ends with santaana.org. if you are conducting conducting business, city business on your a cell phone, via text, or via email, it could potentially be subject to a PRA. That is why I advised all of you early on to simply create a free Gmail account, a free Yahoo account, something like that, where you could send all emails related to commissioner business. That way you could at least protect your personal information from a potential PRA request. Thanks, Dean.
That's a good point as far as the PRA request. I didn't even think about that when I was responding to your question. And I'll just, yes, what you are correct in my attempt to, what I was trying to say as far as posting, whether you're posting as in a personal account or something that's more representative of the commission. And just using myself as an example, I think I had shared with you all at the training back in April, I first learned about civilian oversight of law enforcement. I was a professor teaching in North Carolina at the time, and the city I lived in had a high number of police shootings and killings of citizens. And so I started, found a like-minded group of people in the community that spearheaded the effort to establish a civilian oversight board in the city where I was in. Took 2 years, we finally were able to do that. Starting this position a few years later, working with Nicole, some of the stuff that I would post just as my usual posting, because I'm very passionate about certain things, and would post some things on social media previously, but in my role now, I'm very careful about that, because I know that if I post certain things, as passionate as I am about certain things, people know who I am in the world of oversight, and it can skew or affect the way that they see NACOL as a whole. Even though I, as an individual, have my own ideas and I'm entitled to those, and everyone is, I know that what I post on social media can reflect on NACOL as the organization. So just me as an individual thinking, I don't want to bring any controversy, I don't want to negatively impact the organization I work for, because we exist to do something that we believe in very strongly, and we want to help communities in the work of oversight. And so I'm not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize our reputation and ultimately, therefore, the work that we do with cities across the country.
I have a question on that.
Mhm.
I understand that a lot of people do have these outside accounts and all that. Who's monitoring any of that? How does it get monitored? How do you know that somebody isn't posting something that's derogatory or inflammatory or what have you? Who's, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a big internet. I mean, I don't know
Oh,
anything about.
trust me, if people in Santa Ana are interested in civilian oversight of law enforcement or law enforcement in general, and you have accounts, they're probably watching you what you post.
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Mhm.
Yeah, people have taken screenshots, and I think that's pretty common to people to report and just take screenshots of what people post.
Mhm.
Technologically over my head.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's more reporting than you imagine, or more tabs on the commission than
Oh, yeah.
that. So that is interesting. I am curious also, I'm wondering, because I do agree with you on how this can impact the legitimacy of the commission despite our own individual beliefs,
Mhm.
and how that the perception of the community impacts, right? So even if you are able to think and look at facts, what you post impacts what people think of you and what their expectations or thoughts on your decision-making process. But I am curious as to, especially in your position as someone who's been part of this, right, and has an understanding, what are some troubleshootings of, for example, when you are trying to oversight, right, when you are trying to make sure that that is the case, yet because there's tension in the community that the issue is not oversight, but that the issue should be more policing, and that becomes a censorship, right, that impacts legitimacy at the same time.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, maybe you'll touch on this, we can talk about this if you're gonna touch on this, on the legitimacy, but I would love to have a discussion about that so that we can ensure to prevent that.
Yes, actually, when I get to the legitimacy piece, we can talk more about that. And I will say this, right now, though, when it comes to legitimacy in the community, The community will look at law enforcement and have their ideas whether or not they're a legitimate organization. They will have it about this commission as well. So just what you think the community is thinking about law enforcement, they're also assessing and evaluating and having some of the same thoughts about you. And so we'll talk more about this when we get to that piece. So, all right. News outlets. It is helpful to have journalists who are knowledgeable about oversight. And so if there are any opportunities in the future, once you start getting the work done, to have conversations with journalists, invite them to a meeting, so they can learn more about what you're doing. It's helpful for them to have information, accurate information about what it is that you do and what oversight is. I have Google alerts on civilian oversight of law enforcement and jails and prisons. And so I get about 5 different alerts a day from Google News. And I cannot tell you how much I read where descriptions about what civilian oversight is, the descriptions are inaccurate, or there's misinformation about the work that we do. And so establishing relationships, if that's possible, with journalists and those in the media can be helpful to get clear information, accurate information about what civilian oversight is out into the community. And so when and if there's an incident that happens in the community, they can already be knowledgeable and have a foundation of what civilian oversight is. I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay. I'm going to skip these 2 slides for a moment and get to communication the other way, 2-way. One way, the first way was conveying information, how you all can get information out to the community. And this one is receiving information from the community. There are all different, or quite a few different ways you can get community input. So of course, public comment is an important one, and that's available to everybody. I think you have monthly meetings. Some of the things that other oversight bodies do, they have surveys where they survey the community about the work that the oversight body is doing, and I'll show you an example coming up. And this can be done digitally, a link from your website, it can be an email blast, it can be done in different ways. If you're tabling at and about oversight somewhere, you can also have some form of paper surveys. And so that's just one of the multiple ways you can get information pretty quickly. Focus groups. This is small groups focused on a particular topic or issue. Most often, you don't want usually more than 12 people, because the purpose of focus groups is to get direct, targeted information about something in particular, and have enough time for everyone to talk. So if you had 50 people in a focus group, that's not going to work, because not everyone's going to have the opportunity to really share their ideas and thoughts about the topic. Listening sessions and town halls and forums are much larger than focus groups. Listening sessions take advantage of groups that already exist. So as you can see, if you wanted feedback from, say, a youth group about something going on in the community, or about civilian oversight in general, grassroots organizations, if you wanted input from police officers. So think of pre-existing groups. If there's a particular type of information that it is that you're seeking, then listening groups can be helpful. Town halls and forums are much larger. Usually the general public is invited, and so there may be lots of people that show up, and there may be a few people that show up. Just depends on the interest level of the community. I will say, for listening, well, actually focus group listening sessions and town halls and forums, it is helpful if you do those things to have someone who has experience facilitating discussions in those areas. Focus groups are pretty small, easier to manage. Listening sessions, again, a very specific piece of information you're seeking from a pre-existing group, and so that's easier to manage. Town halls and forums can sometimes be a little more challenging to manage, so here's where someone who is experienced with that can come in helpful. Something that someone who is facilitating a town hall should be prepared for is people show up, people can be angry, people can be upset about something, and so someone who is skilled facilitation is really important to be able to manage those things.
I have a question. Do you recommend, so for example, if a nonprofit sends an email to just one commissioner, about a particular issue that is occurring and that they would like to seek further attention. What do you suggest is the best practice for that? Like,
I would think that it should be brought to the full commission
Mhm.
to discuss.
yeah, so if we received an email, then we should send this to all commissioners and for it to be like a meeting with that nonprofit?
If
Or-
someone's, you mean if someone reaches out to you and says nonprofit, they
Yeah.
would love to meet with you about.
Regarding a very particular subject, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna say it's gonna depend on whatever the subject matter is.
Mhm.
However, I think the commission.
Not a complaint, yeah.
Right, but whether you meet individually with them or you discuss it first, I think all commissioners should be aware
Mhm.
of what's going on.
Mhm.
That if you choose to take a meeting, that you're meeting with them. So again, it goes back to the legitimacy, so that, word gets around, people talk, you know how these things go. People will take screenshots of social media, so that if someone is upset about something that you met with about the nonprofit with, and then they come to one of the meetings and during 3-minute public comment period, express being upset about it, and this is the first time your fellow commissioners are hearing about it, and now they're confused. So you want to avoid those types of
Mhm.
situations. It is helpful for commissioners to be aware. If you are representing
Mhm.
this commission in whatever meetings you have, the rest, your co-commissioners should be privy to, what it is that
Yeah.
you're doing.
Absolutely. I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, what are the next steps, right? Like, so for example, if certain nonprofits want to discuss something, a
Mhm.
subject matter to determine whether that's something the commission can help or cannot, should we just encourage them to come and do a public comment? Like, is that the best approach?
I think that can be handled in multiple ways. They can
Mhm.
come for a public comment. If you say, I'm gonna stick with you as the
Mhm.
person, if you meet with them and they're comfortable with you representing what it is that they want to bring it to the, like a regular
Mhm.
body meeting, I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but as long as whatever the information is accurately portrayed and
And
everyone's
shared with
aware of it.
everyone.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Okay. Regular updates and public presence. One of the most common community outreach activities is tabling, literally, going into different parts of the community, whether it's health fairs, different kinds of fairs in the communities. This is a picture from Atlanta's Citizen Review Board, where they go out to this mall the first Friday of every month. I think every first Friday, yeah, of every month, and they set up a table and they provide information on their review board to whoever's interested and stops by their table. Speaking engagements, you all, this is another common one where commission members may take the opportunity to try to increase awareness about what it is that you all do, the work of your Oversight Commission, going out to different segments of the community, to different nonprofits, whatever it might be, and providing information on what it is you do. If there's a budget involved, or if there is a budget that allows this, there are some oversight boards and commissions that do PSA, TV and print ads, or they might have a billboard, like I know the Bay Area Rapid Transit, they have billboards in their train stations, and digital signs as well. So the idea is, especially for newer boards and commissions that are just starting, to get the word out, to try to educate people and increase awareness about what it is that you do, so people recognize you as a familiar part of the community, the work that you do. Other efforts: invite police to meetings to provide data updates, and to train on policies and practices. So when you start reviewing cases, it is going to be very helpful if you have an understanding of the policies that are related to the cases that you're reviewing. One of the best ways to do that is have the training provided by the police officers themselves, so that you can ask questions and they can answer in the way that they would if they were providing the training to other law enforcement officers. Providing data updates is something that is commonly done. Some boards and commissions that I work with, they get monthly updates from their police departments, and these are data, say on arrests, use of force, traffic stops. It all depends on what it is that you might be interested in and the data that the police department already collects. Some also get them on a quarterly basis as opposed to a monthly basis. Just depends on what it is that you all agree to or would like. Invite elected officials, community members, and others to the meeting, to your meetings to provide information and discuss public safety topics, just as you might want to go out to different organizations and offices to speak about civilian oversight. You may make the invitation for other individuals and organizations to do the same here at your meetings. Now, some oversight offices actually work hand in hand with their police department as far as providing training about civilian oversight. So when they do training with a new police class, there are a few oversight bodies that have regularly will go in and they have a set aside time that they will train that class on civilian oversight. So it's coming from you all as the commissioners who are doing the work. You provide the training to those officers, just as the police officers might come to one of your meetings to provide the training on the policies and practices that they actually employ. And then attend law enforcement public safety events, advisory meetings if they have them, department graduations, memorial services. So a big part of civilian oversight of law enforcement and the ultimate goal and purpose of oversight in general is to improve police-community relations, right? We want to increase trust among all segments of the community, and one way of doing that is not just looking at reviewing cases and focusing necessarily on all of the misconduct allegations and then the reviews that occur around those, but also supporting good police work and efforts whenever possible, because there has to be cooperation between this body and the police department. You're gonna have to get the closed investigations from them to review. You're gonna have to communicate with them to provide recommendations. Under the best circumstances, if there's a good relationship between both bodies, then that makes the work a lot easier. Not saying everyone has to agree on everything 100%, because that is not the reality of the world we live in. But even if there's disagreement, it is great to have good relationships, working relationships in place. And so being supportive of one another, not just when there's misconduct, but just recognizing the good work that's being done in the community goes a long way. All right, these are just a couple of the next few slides, just things I came across when I was preparing this training a while ago or creating it. Kind of some of the out-of-the-box ideas that I thought, that's pretty cool. And again, a lot of it depends on budget, and I'm not saying that you all have to do all this, but just throwing some of these things out there so that if there's anything that interests you as you all continue to do the work and get staff on board, hopefully you can incorporate some things in some small way. All right, so this is something that Atlanta created, the Justice Crusader, to represent their review board. But when they go out to children's fairs, or when they're tabling at events where there are families, they determined that it was, having the superhero type figure is a little more appealing to children than some of us adults sitting at a table trying to talk about civilian oversight. So they actually, I just took a few screenshots. They have an entire backstory on this character that they created, and so I just thought that was unique and different, and hadn't seen that a lot. This is Chicago, their COPA office. They actually have a People's Academy. So Chicago has an extensive oversight mechanism. They have multiple offices, so they have a hybrid oversight system. They have multiple offices, and they're staffed. All of these different offices are staffed. One of the things that COPA does is they have a People's Academy, and this is over a period of, I know it's like 12 weeks, but quite a few weeks. But they educate the public, and people have to apply to attend these academies because they only allow a certain number in each 12-week period. But citizens attend maybe like 1 hour or so at a designated time each week, and they learn all about the work of civilian oversight. And so this is also not just a good educational activity, but it's also a way that if people are interested enough in what they're learning, this creates a pipeline for people to serve on their boards or even to go into the work of civilian oversight as paid professionals. Thinking of scalability, we work with a lot of small communities that do not, and it's not likely that they would have the budget to do something even close to that. So when we think about scaling things to what is feasible for each community, recently I was with a community that was maybe like 100 or so thousand. And so they liked this idea. No, they didn't have the budget to do this, but then thought, but even if we do like an education session for 2 hours on a Saturday and invite people, then that's something that they can do, because they would never be able to do this. But it would work for them and their community and the budget that they have.
Are these education sessions about what we do as a police oversight commission, or what the ordinance allows us, right, to do? Or can these sessions also be about educating the community about the research, right? Like using the data and the stats of what what policing looks like in the community here in Santa Ana, and then bringing in research, because I think sometimes there's a lot of antiquated thoughts, right, about policing that differ from what the research says works. And I wonder how we can bring research, like, is that something that you've seen people do, or do they just focus on the commission's role?
Well, I'll say for the academy, they do have a list of, you can see the topics covered here, so that's them. But Philadelphia, they have a community outreach team. Philadelphia has a huge office. They have a whole community engagement outreach team. And they do a lot of education, a lot of community events that I guess in some ways go beyond just the work of oversight. And so they focus on social justice issue. They do trainings on the history of policing, particularly in Philadelphia. They focus on social services in the community. And so Philadelphia and some other cities, I'm just thinking Philadelphia, that comes to mind first, because just a few weeks ago, we actually hosted their community outreach team did a webinar for NACOL. And so they have created a whole training around community resources, and that's not the work of oversight, but they consider it the work of oversight, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not in their ordinance that they have to provide this training or these resources, but they developed it because they realized they have so many people that were reaching out to their board, seeking assistance in one way or another. It wasn't necessarily about police misconduct, all of these requests, a lot of them are, but even those that were related to police misconduct, someone wanting to file a complaint, what they recognized, the Philadelphia Community Outreach Team recognized, was a lot of these people who are calling, they can actually, if we can provide, link them up with some of the existing community resources, whether it's social services, legal aid, whatever it is, that actually resolves some of the problems that people are reaching out to them about. And so rather than just turning them away and saying, that's not really a civilian oversight issue, and that's the end of it, they started creating resources, like here's a sheet of, different service providers in the community. Here's a training that we now do on a regular basis. And so whatever that is created, well, I will say different agencies or oversight bodies create all kinds of different types of trainings, but the common thread is once you start doing the work, if there's something that you recognize that might be helpful, then oversight bodies might take it upon themselves if they have the staff or if they have the resources, the time, the staffing. Because the other thing is feasibility, practicality wise, you all are volunteers. Right now you don't have your staffing positions filled. And so to do a lot of things outside of what's mandated in your ordinance might be a lot to take on. And so, but going back, the long answer to your question, trainings can be developed, whatever the need is, or whatever you all feel is responsive to the citizens of Santa Ana, what you feel like would be helpful to them. Mm-hmm.
I have a question on providing training that falls outside of the scope of the police oversight topic. How does that How does that, I guess, implicate potential legal liability for an oversight board? Meaning, if we're offering training on things like, on things implicating, you know, interactions with the police or things like that, could that potentially create liability for an oversight board if somebody follows something that we, you know, through a seminar or something, disseminate, right? Has that ever happened before?
I'm sure it has happened. I can't think of anything that comes to mind immediately. And remember, y'all, I'm here for almost a year. The 21st will be my first year anniversary with Nicole. I will say this, though. If you're not comfortable or you're concerned about that, then think about what partners in the community you might collaborate with to do the training. For example, I know that some oversight boards, some people feel different about the ACLU, but they do training on Know Your Rights, a variety of different things. And so I know of oversight boards that in collaboration with the ACLU will host a training on Know Your Rights. There might be a nonprofit in this community that is knowledgeable about community resources. So as you're getting cases or people are calling in with complaints or other things that aren't necessarily complaints, but you start to recognize a need, there's more of a need for social services or, you know, legal aid services or something that is beyond your scope. If you find some organization in the community that is knowledgeable, that is what they do, then think about doing a joint training with them, right? It might be you host them, but since that's the work that they do, that they could talk about it. It could even be, and this is going big, but, and again, just throwing ideas out there, not saying this is what you have to do, but just talking about this, it makes me think of, I think on the next slide, or one of the next slides, on the right, you see the canceled session. So this was Atlanta back in June. They were going to have an open house. It was canceled because at the, like the day before that morning, they had a water main break that everything came to a halt in Atlanta. However, I'm thinking just total scenario, you started to recognize that there's a need, people are calling about, they actually need social services or mental health services. If you were to hold, say, you know, an open house or host a session where you invited different nonprofit representatives from nonprofit organizations that you recognize might be able to be helpful to the people who are calling in or to the community in general, you can have representatives at something like this at one event. So yes, I wouldn't advise, definitely, if you're uncomfortable about the potential, if you're not the expert on the topic, then yes, stay away from it. Get someone who is the expert and knowledgeable in it, because yeah, don't want to create any problems for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, this was the next slide, and so yeah, but these are just a couple more examples of kind of increasing community awareness, reaching out to the community to let them know you're here, what you're doing. On the left, that was when Richard Rosenthal had just started as the police auditor there, and they did, and this was actually not planned too far in advance. I remember when this happened and talking to him afterwards, but they did a meet and greet when he, after, not too long after he was hired. And they had about 30 or so people who showed up. It was very informal, just come meet the new independent police auditor in town, and people stopped by his office, and you know, they had some little snacks and refreshments, and they just wanted to meet him, just say hi. So it was very informal, and they deemed it successful, with, you know, just people stopping by to show interest in what they were doing. All right, and then these final three examples are just examples from the city of New York. Their CCRB. So they have a huge staff, they have a huge office. So again, this is just an example of what some of the different oversight entities are doing. But they have a youth council that helps provide actual input on some of the work that they do. And they actually run or organize a Speak Up, Speak Out Youth Summit on policing in the city. They have a barbershop and salon series, and so that's a part of their outreach. They go into different barbershops and beauty salons to talk about civilian oversight and just police and community relations. And so going to where people are, thinking outside the box. And then they also have a courtside initiative where they table, but it's at basketball courts, right, in the summers. And so, just some ideas. All right, so I'll pause here if you have any further questions at all about engagement and outreach. Okay, so let me go back. There's a slide that I skipped, or a couple slides. Very commonly, when people are tabling, board members and commission members are tabling, this is a trifold brochure. Usually they have something printed that they can hand out to people. So, they're not just telling people go to my website, but they're actually giving them something very simple to hold on to. New York, I think it was New York, recently shared with me, these are called zines right here that I have in my hand. And what they found with these little zines, they're just simply an 8 by 11 paper? Is that the size? Regular sheet of paper, but a regular sheet of paper. And they found that particularly with younger people, with teenagers, with college-age students, and even some older people, but these are called zines. It's the same type of information that is in like a trifold brochure, but for some reason they found these to be very, very popular, and people like these. Easy to do, but I just like to bring it as an example, and this is one, and I can leave them here if you want to see it. But they had a community outreach event with the LGBTQ community, and so, and so they created these to take to the community event instead of a trifold. So, all right. All right. Moving on into transparency. So, transparency, accountability, those are two of the words that we often hear in civilian oversight. It's in our mission statement, NACO's mission statement, but it is something that we promote, and most oversight bodies, that is one of the goals. Yeah, you can take that too. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so one of the reasons that civilian oversight exists is because the community has asked for, demanded, and requested, and found it helpful to have more of an understanding of what happens in law enforcement. And for many years, it was not a transparent process. And so this is one attempt, civilian oversight, in making it more transparent so that people can have a better understanding of the processes that are involved. So when it comes to the work that you will be doing, particularly when you start reviewing cases and developing different types of checklists or whatever it is that you create as a part of the work that you're doing, it is most helpful to the public to have as much information as possible available on your website. And I will say this, much as information as possible available to the public as permitted by law. So everything I'm going to talk about here, of course, is going to be what you are allowed to share, especially with your what is permitted in your ordinance, with your state law, and with the federal law. I'm not a lawyer, so I think you will have to ask your legal advice when it comes to those things, particularly here. But it's helpful to have as much information as available to the public as possible, from your handbooks, the manuals, your ordinance, any checklists that you use when you're reviewing cases, your procedures, the case flow, what happens when a complaint comes in, all the way to where it's resolved. And so this is just a list of some of the things that are available on different oversight bodies' websites. These are screenshots I took directly as an example from the Seattle Office of Police Accountability. Large office, has been around for a while, but you can see, I wasn't sure if I would be able to go over to websites, so I did screenshots here. But you can see on the left side, they've got their operating manual internal operations and training manual. They've got their ordinance and a couple of other city ordinances, but they put everything on there. You can go to the website and you can see just all the information that's there. On the right side, Seattle did have a consent decree, which involves the federal government coming in, but to be as transparent as possible about the federal government having oversight, they provided the settlement agreement and all related documents there. You can see they have their collective bargaining agreements on the website as well. Okay. So Seattle does a great example, I think is a great example of making everything possible available that they are allowed to. Transparency when it comes to internal data. So this gets to the work that you all will be doing. It's helpful to provide as much information as possible. So say just anybody who's interested in Santa Ana on the work that you're doing, they can go to your website and they can find a bunch of information, whether it's the manuals and checklists and everything that you're doing. When you start to look at, or when you start receiving complaints or reviewing cases, and I believe you're staffing-wise, the director will have the ability to conduct investigations. Is that correct? Okay. And so when all of that work is underway, in your annual reports, which I'll get to in a moment, or some way, it can be beneficial and helpful to the community and all stakeholders involved in civilian oversight to be able to access certain data just easily online or as easy as possible. It may take some time to be able to get information online, but here are some examples of what agencies, large and small, make available. So complaints received and how they were handled, okay, what the allegations were, and of course, protecting confidentiality. I've seen there are some cities that actually have the name of involved officers. Most of them do not. And so again, that goes to what is permitted here in Santa Ana. But having some kind of, whether they're tables, charts that report on this type of information is helpful. Demographics, subject officer demographics, complaint allegations and geographies, and so that just where is there particular neighborhoods, are there a particular part of the cities where a lot of complaints are coming from? That speaks to the geographies, commendations.
I have a question
Mhm.
on this, and this is something that I think the commission has encountered recently around transparency on internal data. For California, we do have the Police Bill of Rights and other different penal codes that might relate to the whether or not complaints are made public. Have you encountered this in other California jurisdictions or in other parts of in other areas where you now have oversight boards and they have to struggle with those issues?
This is always, yes, this is always an issue wherever there's oversight being established or already established. There's usually some disagreement or some negotiation that has to happen between law enforcement, their representative bodies, and oversight in city government. And so the short answer is yes. How to resolve that is a much longer answer. But as far, are you asking specifically about
Because
How to-
I'm saying that some of the best practices on transparency that you have here is transparency on data to the public around the complaints received, the complaint allegations, and so some of that data, and pending an oversight director, right?
Yes,
I think they
yes.
can see demographics and more like superficial data, perhaps being something that the commission can do. But then perhaps like the type of allegations that are made public or no, or maybe categories. I'm just trying to figure out in terms of how do we go as a commission, that we have to follow different penal codes, state laws, and also memorandums and agreements to police to best put forward data publicly that the public can say, hey, I see it, and okay, I understand it.
So I will say most cities that I've seen in the information that they make publicly available, they do not have names of officers and de-identified data. So nobody's names are attached, nobody's specific addresses are attached. It's information that protects the confidentiality of the complainant, the person who filed the complaint, and the officer that's involved. However, I have seen a few, like I just mentioned, where, and it was surprising, where they actually have the name of officers involved, because that's gonna be something that the police union will fight against, that information getting out. And so I would say that's only a handful of cases where I've actually seen that. I wish I could tell you what those were, but honestly, I spend so much time kind of looking at different websites for oversight agencies, looking at reports, looking for information as I develop training, and that's one that I came across a couple recently that had officers' names. But that's gonna be something I think that is more rare, to actually see the names in a public document.
Thank you.
And really, the idea of this is not to, it's to be as transparent as possible. Like, this whole section of the training is on transparency. And so, having de-identified data, even if it's just providing charts or like bar charts or pie charts or something that's very easy to see, before you can even get to the more lengthy type of information. But providing some type of data is helpful to the public, because again, thinking about why you exist, right? How did Santa Ana get a police commission? It was probably initiated by a recognized need to provide more transparency about what's going on. And so if you're getting data over time, being able to share that type of information, like a lot of these examples that you see up here, to the general public will serve the purpose of why you exist in the first place. Also notice on their commendations, there are quite a few oversight bodies that don't just accept complaints that are filed by the public, but they also accept commendations for police officers. And so if that's something that is done, that's good to report on as well. Recommendations regarding investigative findings, discipline, or policies. So I believe you all will be reviewing cases and making recommendations. You can't impose discipline or anything like that, but you can make recommendations. That's something that is helpful to provide information in your annual reports. I didn't include it in tonight's presentation, but you can go on a lot of different oversight body websites and see their annual reports, and you can see how they report their recommendations. And again, that looks very different. Some are very detailed, some are just very, one-pager synopsis of it, and some go into more detail and multiple pages per case. And including with recommendations, it's helpful to also include the law enforcement responses to the recommendations that are made, so that the public or whoever's reviewing this information can see, well, what happened to the recommendations. It's helpful to provide that information, that follow-up. Okay. Internal data continue. Let's see, interactions. Oh, this is your interactions with what types of outreach events that you've held, what types of, where in the community you held outreach events, who attended, how many people attended. So this kind of information, just tracking for yourself over time as commissioners, can be helpful to see what you're doing and to kind of help identify where you might go in the future with outreach and engagement. And of course, operations and performance, making that as much as possible available to the public as well, so that they have an idea of, just like in a lot of annual reports by agencies, nonprofits, whatever, they include that type of information. And then when it comes to, when you all start reviewing cases, when it comes to closing cases, of course, being as transparent as possible with the person who filed the complaint and anybody involved is helpful. By all means, notify the complainants of the outcomes and your findings. And as much as possible, if you can describe the process to them, you all will be more familiar with it once you start reviewing cases, but sometimes it's confusing. It can be confusing for citizens who are filing a complaint. Just think of any time you've had to, go into any public or government office for anything, even the DMV, goodness gracious, can be very confusing. Especially, so think about it that way, right? Someone doing something for the first time, they may get very confused, or it could be helpful to just be as clear as possible a couple times, explaining the process to them. And as the extent that the law permits, explaining to complainants how and why decisions were made. There may be some information that you can't reveal, so definitely respect that confidentiality, but share as much as possible with the actual people who filed complaints. All right, so I'll pause there. All right, take a drink.
Yes, let's take a 5-minute break. The current time is 6:48. Recorded, thank you. Madam Secretary, are we ready to begin?
Yes, Vice Chair Carpenter.
Okay, the time is 7 PM. Are we recording? Thank you. Meeting is in progress again. Thank you.
So I'll just make a comment. So earlier, I had raised concerns about police oversight boards offering training to civilians about things that are outside the scope of an oversight board. And we were given these zines that were published by the PAB, and I guess that is, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but you know, these pamphlets are a good example of the concern that I raised earlier, because they contain things that are not entirely accurate, and they're being given out by an oversight board to civilians to educate them about their rights in a police encounter. And for example, one of these pamphlets says that officers must be truthful at all times, and that means they can't make up information or change the information or leave out information. But I don't think that's entirely accurate. I'm an attorney, so you know, I know a little bit about the law. Police officers can lie to you. That is a you know, something that is in their toolkit. Another example is, it says that police officers cannot use their legal authority to detain somebody without a lawful reason, and that probable cause must exist that a person has committed a crime, and that also is not true. Police officers can stop you if they have reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime. And so the only reason I bring this up is because, you know, as an oversight board, you hold a special place in society. People view you as credible about issues relating to, you know, police encounters and things like that. And the goal of an oversight board is to increase or improve relations between police officers and citizens that they police. And you know, if we're not careful about what we say as an oversight board, we could end up actually doing the opposite. So these pamphlets, for example, somebody could see them, and see that they're published by an oversight board, believe that they're entirely correct, end up in an encounter with a police officer where they end up following this advice, and then, you know, they end up having a negative interaction with the police. And so, and that would be, you know, that would deteriorate or undermine relations between citizens and police department, and that is all because of something that an oversight board published that wasn't vetted. And so, all that to say, I think there's a lot of value in a police oversight board educating people about their rights and you know, their rights in interacting with police officers. It just needs to be done in the right way, and that's all I had to say about that.
Yep, points taken. And my fault for actually not reviewing the information. My point in providing that particular zine, or those zines, was just, this is a different way of getting information out. So I did not look at that, so my fault for doing that. However, yes, agree with you 100%, the point you made earlier, and this is a case in point of the potential damage that can result when providing information that is inaccurate. And so I know when you all have a director and your staff, I would envision that one of the responsibilities of the director, whatever is created, coming out on behalf of the commission and the oversight office, will have been vetted and, in some cases, I would imagine, have gone through your legal to ensure that it's accurate. Another thing that brings up is if there are opportunities, for example, just throwing, you know, going back to the example or the discussion about doing trainings, and if you're not the expert in a particular thing, collaborate with the expert. In that particular case, if you're not the expert on knowing your rights, of course, attorneys who work in this area, or even law enforcement, doing something jointly with them to educate the community about their rights. And so, yes, points taken, and you're right, that could create more problems than good in the effort. And so, by all means, yes, absolutely ensure what you're putting out there is accurate information. Yep. Okay. All right. Other questions or comments about anything before we go to reporting practices? We are almost, or just over halfway through, so I know you're not at the point where you can actually issue reports. So again, think of this as by the time you get to that, you will already have an idea of what it is that might go into a report, what to keep in mind as you're preparing your first report. I don't know if the staff will do that when they're hired, but you definitely will have some input on the information that is in the report and the work. You all have done a lot of the work that the report is conveying, the information that's being conveyed in the report. Okay, so at the very least, we do recommend that every oversight agency issue an annual report. It can be more frequent than that, getting tongue-tied, more frequent than that, but at the very least an annual report. And I will say, work with a lot of communities that don't have staff assigned, they don't have a budget, and so the reports, the annual reports that I've seen are very short and brief, but they're there, they exist, and they're publicly available for anybody who can go online to those oversight agencies. They can, I've seen them range from anywhere from PowerPoint slides that they, you know, on each slide there's a different graphic or there's different information, and that's the ability of that particular oversight agency at this point in time. Then you go to some of the larger agencies, and they have extensive reports. They not only have an annual report, they might have a quarterly report. They have special reports, and I'm going to go back to Seattle's office in a moment to show you just how many reports that some of these larger agencies have. So keeping in mind, you have not done your first report yet, your first annual report, but it may start out as something that is much briefer. It's briefer, may not be what you want it to be ultimately, but as long as you're putting information out there, have an annual report, and making it available to whoever wants it. If you can put it on the website, even better, people can access it that way. But at a minimum, there should be mission, authority, and purpose, which oftentimes come directly out of your ordinance, included in your annual report. It should be written in an accessible manner, and so we know about the average reading age of the U.S. adult population is about the 8th or 9th grade, and so want to present information in a way that is understandable for 8th and 9th grade reading level. If you have the ability to have it translated to languages that are common in your community, that's always a good idea. But just thinking about how to make this as accessible as possible. Include an executive summary and appendices when it's appropriate, and so these will go to some of the larger reports, or reports where you might want to not take up space in the main body of the report, but you might want to provide some tables or some additional information, checklists, whatever it is that you all might use as appendices can be helpful. And this is the last bullet, no censorship or influence by law enforcement or political stakeholders. So a part of the, one of the key principles of civilian oversight is that you're independent. So of course you do want to have your director, staff, legal in some cases, review the report to ensure you're not violating confidentiality or any laws with what you're reporting. But this should be a report that is issued by the Oversight Office, and you all should have the say-so of what goes in it without being influenced one way or another by any political stakeholders.
I have a question on that. How do other agencies navigate what it is? Because the law is always up to interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some things are factual and some things are interpreted.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens when an interpretation can be differently? Sorry, thank you. What happens when something can be interpreted differently, and maybe some commissioners or the commission doesn't really agree with the interpretation? What what have other oversights done in that case? Because that, like a legal, right, like a lot of legal knowledge can impact or influence. So if this should be independent, which I agree, sometimes things, can be manipulated through legal language and influence without trying. So like, how do you prevent that?
When there's a question of interpretation, that can be challenging, and it has actually stalled the work of some boards and commissions. And so I know of a couple of boards that are in that position now, and have not been able to start reviewing cases because there is a differences in interpretation. And so,
Can you just explain what you mean by like a difference in interpretation? What context?
I'm thinking of one board in particular where they're tasked with reviewing something, or reviewing closed investigations. However, there's a disagreement in the language that is in the ordinance, and I think it has to do with access to information. And so police have one interpretation, the oversight office has a different interpretation, and so there's an ongoing discussion that has been occurring for quite some time now, trying to come to an agreement on what it means. And so in the meantime, it's preventing them from reviewing cases. However, they can review policies and do other things that they're mandated or allowed to do per ordinance. But when it comes to reviewing cases, because of that difference in what is accessible or what the access to the information that they need to review cases, that's what's in question.
Are there any cases that's interesting? Do you know of any examples where a police oversight board has taken legal action to be able to fulfill their duties? Like,
I do. And again, I cannot think of I can't give you the particular name, the specific name, because I look at so much every single day on what's happening across the country. But yes, I know I've come across in all my many Google alerts, a board that has taken legal action, yes, against the city, yes.
One example that I can provide on something that relates to us, for example, is something that has been clarified. Thank you to Assistant City Attorney Martinez. I wanted to, for example, see the possibility of having a conversation about, providing recommendation to the council on the ordinance itself. But something like that, it's not so clear in the ordinance that we can actually do that. It doesn't say we cannot, but also it doesn't say that we can. And so even a conversation like that, we can't have it because the ordinance is not clear on that. So those are like an example that we have here.
I have a question for you. As all of us are appointed by a political body, how do you keep politics out of this?
As much as possible. Well, for example, if there's something that you want to report, for one of the things that I said earlier when it comes to transparency is reporting, when you make recommendations, whether it's for policy or practice, whatever it might be, you should also include the law enforcement agency's response to that recommendation. Now, there may be a police department that is not happy with that. Well, they may not have acted on the recommendations. They may not have formally responded to the recommendation, and so that might be something that they don't want in the report. So in that case, if they're not happy with you all reporting that and say, well, we'd rather you not report that, include that in your annual report. In that case, there could be a city council member that agrees with them and says, yeah, I don't think that's a great idea. Well, that's some political influence right there. If you all think it's a good idea, and again, going back to transparency, the whole purpose of what you're doing and making the process as transparent as possible for the general public, if you all think it's a good idea to report on the responses to the recommendations, then you should report that. And so it shouldn't be influenced politically, if that's what you all as a commission decide is helpful and needed.
How do you balance that against, maintaining good relationships with the police department, for example, right? Like, there might be something that we don't we're not obligated to report, that we could report, that would be helpful for the public to know or interesting for the public to know. The police department or city council or whoever might not want us to report it, and let's say theoretically they can't stop us from doing it, but from a working relationship standpoint, it might be in the oversight board's interest not to publish something because it would ensure continued, good relationships with the police department or the city council.
Having ongoing conversations, not any surprises. Like, if you would like to include something in a report, sticking with this example, that someone's not happy with, or might take a hit on your wonderful relationship with the police department or the city council or whatever it might be transparent about that. Have a conversation with them about that, so it's not a surprise. Be open to listen to why they're concerned or might not be okay with that, but then also be prepared to express your position and why you think it's important to share the information. So I think there can be disagreement and still have a good working relationship. I think it can be a respectful relationship, and having enough respect for one another to not have surprises, to be willing to come to the table before something like that is issued, a report is issued, and giving them a heads up and saying, hey, this is what we plan on including in this report. Have a conversation, don't have to come to an agreement on it, but have a respectful conversation about it, and take personal opinions out of it, and also keeping in mind, again, what is the purpose of this commission? Why do you have oversight in Santa Ana? So I cannot stress enough the value of good communication, the good relationships with the police department. And I think I said this during the break, and I'll reiterate it again. There are some segments of a community that think that civilian oversight is anti-police. There are some segments of the community that think law enforcement is anti-civilian oversight. And in some cases, that could be true. But overall, in general, like, one of our goals in civilian oversight is to improve community police relationships, to make safety a primary goal in the community, safety for all citizens. And so having a relationship between law enforcement and civilian oversight, the body, where you can respectfully disagree, where you can have difficult conversations that need to be had, is imperative.
Yeah, and speaking to that, I think I really appreciate, this meeting has been refreshing, and really helpful and useful. I'm wondering, and I think you might do this with the last portion of, but in those relations, which I agree, that it's really challenging, right, in the position that we're in, because we have so many community perspectives, so many variety, even within, the police department, you have different perspectives of what community policing looks like, right? You have policies, and then there's agency and how they differentiate and implement that. I'm curious as to whether you will have examples for us later on how to navigate that, or whether you have resources for us to seek. And by that, I think concrete things, right? Because saying good relationship, but what does that even mean is my question, right? That's unclear to me, and primarily because we are asked, right? Like, I get messages of sometimes the community asking, well, is this oversight even really independent, right? Because of X, Y, and Z. And so if you want to foster, which I agree, we need good relationship with Santa PD. I'm born and raised in Santa Ana. I've seen the changes in the police department. And I think that sometimes some people have, you have all walks of life, and then you have the, perspectives, and sometimes some very extreme, and some can be more harmful, right, instead of working together. And so I'm curious as to what exactly does it mean to have a working relationship, and how do you bridge that gap between the way I view it as an oversight commissioner is that I owe the community what they ask for, and that is independence, and that is also based on facts. And what is happening, what does the research say? Not what I think should work, but what does the information say? And that's not the case for everyone here. And so how do you help navigate that to ensure that we have the actual outcome that that the community intended to have?
So, some of the relationships, the best relationships between civilian oversight entities and law enforcement happen in more of an informal setting, in your formal capacities, but more of an informal setting. For example, a community event, right? So this goes back to collaborating. If there's an opportunity where law enforcement, civilian oversight has an opportunity to do a joint training on something, take that opportunity. The officer who's there, along with the commissioner who's there, will get to know each other in a way that you can't get to know each other sitting in a room like this. Now, I know police ride-alongs, for some people who are on boards and commission, do not want to be a part of that. Others have found it extremely helpful. And some of them, by ordinance, are required to go on police ride-alongs. I will say that some of the people who I talked to, even those who were skeptical, nervous, didn't necessarily want to do a police ride-along, they got to know the officers that they were in that ride-along with as human beings and not just as an authority figure, a police officer in the community with no, a one-dimensional representative of the police department. And so they got to know these people because they talked about each other, law enforcement and the oversight member who was doing the ride-along with them. They talked about their kids, they talked about their families, they talked about things that had nothing to do with policing and had nothing to do with civilian oversight. So they saw each other as human beings as opposed to the roles that they fulfilled. That type of interaction can go such a long way because now you begin to see a human being who you may have differing opinions about certain things with, but they're a human being. And as we all know, we all have more alike than we have differences, even if we have very different opinions and beliefs about certain things.
I'm sorry. You're dying down at the end of your.
Oh.
You're dying down at the end of your. Hello. You're dying down at the end of your sentences, and I can't get the ending of it.
Okay,
So could you do me a favor and just kind of
I will pull
keep the
this over
same
a
level
little.
as you're speaking? I'm sorry
And I'll
to
pull this
interrupt.
closer too. No,
I'm-
no.
You know, what you're saying is interesting as can be, but I keep losing you at the end of your sentence.
Got you.
All right,
Um,
sorry about that.
The other thing I think about is when you are staffed and you do have a director, a part of what I would imagine that director does, that person will be tasked with being the one who works directly with the police department. There's going to have to be a way for you all to get the information you need to review your cases, the completed investigations, right? When you start reviewing cases. There's going to be other reasons that you all as commissioners will need to communicate with the law enforcement agency. And so in some cases, you may do it directly. In others, the director may be the conduit of information. And so that person, I imagine, is going to have an instrumental role in establishing the relationship with the police department, between the civilian your commission and the police department in general. And so the efforts that person makes are going to be a major factor in your overall relationship with the police department as well. So I would say even opportunities, going back to some of the outreach and engagement, if there are opportunities to bring, or for you all to go to the police department to do the training yourself on civilian oversight, if you were to do something like that, take an opportunity to meet the officers who are there, and find out a little bit about them. Go to those commendation ceremonies, go to the memorial services. So again, going back to one of the earlier slides about not just focusing on the complaints that are filed from the community and misconduct allegations, but also showing up when there are positive events that should be celebrated, okay? So taking little opportunities like that, just being supportive, can go a long way. Better.
Real quickly, to your point, we just had the National Night Out, which was a great opportunity to meet the officers. I went, and there was a lot of officers there, a lot of people there. You get to talk to people, you get to talk to the
Yes.
officers, and you introduce yourself so they get to know you. So, yeah, there are opportunities for all of us to interact, so it's not a one-way street, which is kind of what's being portrayed sometimes.
Mhm.
You have to reach out also,
Mhm.
both ways, to the community and to the police.
Absolutely.
So anyway, it was a great opportunity, I enjoyed it, so, thank you.
And I'd like to point out one thing too about the community events and the ceremonial meetings is that it is also a unique opportunity in those settings to have a quorum, if you will, present at the same time and not violate the Brown Act. That is expressly one of just very few settings that the Brown Act says that this is important that legislative bodies are together in one setting at the same time. And so there was a carve out for that exception, again, provided you don't discuss business amongst yourself. But again, I think it's fantastic that Tina's bringing this up, and these are really great opportunities for all of you to be together in one spot at the same time, engage with the community, and not violate the Brown Act. So that's just legal's opinion.
Good to know. Okay, so the previous slide was regular reports, which are primarily the annual reports and others that you wish to have on a regular basis. And then there are special reports. So once you get going and getting all this work done, this is far down the road, but once you get to that point, there may be an instance where you're reviewing a particular policy as a result of reviewing a particular case or a series of cases where you know there's a policy that keeps showing up in these cases. So you might want to take a look at the policy, as you're allowed to do and tasked to do by ordinance. So if you kind of take a look at that policy, make recommendations about it, you might want to issue a special report on that policy review on its own. Or you could include that review in your annual report. Just depends on how lengthy it might be, what you want to include in that report. But that's a perfect example of a special report. Special reports are not on an ongoing basis, although they can be issued as many as you want. So there are some other examples. You see data analysis of a particular matter. Seattle actually did a survey of the community, and they did a special report, posted it on their website. Fairfax County, they did an internal evaluation of themselves, their board. Their civilian review panel. So I think after a 4-year period, they actually said, hey, let's evaluate ourselves. And so they issued a special report, and it's available on their website. So anything that might be of concern to the community that you think would be helpful, might not be appropriate or take up too much space, or it takes up too much space in your annual report, then a special report, you have an opportunity to do that. This is just, again, some screenshots I took from the Fairfax County Civilian Review Board's website. And you can see, very simply, they include on their website that they have 2 types of public reports. One report that details their findings when it comes to reviewing cases, and then 2, their annual reports. And then just a quick screenshot on the bottom left, you can just see the actual cases that they've reviewed and they've issued reports on. And then on the right, that's their self-evaluation that I just mentioned. So all of that's available on their website. And this is Seattle's office. Again, large office that is pretty well established, and so has been doing this for quite some time. But you can see that they've got a mix of their annual reports as well as a police accountability community survey report they did after they did a community survey. If you go down a little bit further, you can see different types of reports. Police discipline, appeals status reports. So just examples of all the different types. And then I just included a list of other reports that I came across, some large cities, some smaller. And again, I will say that as long as you're getting information out there, being intentional about providing the information to the public, that's the goal. I've seen some reports that are on PowerPoint slides. I've seen some reports that are on, only took up 3 or 4 pages. But the point is that these oversight bodies are trying to get the information back out to the community. Okay. All right. next section, expectations, legitimacy, and carrying out board responsibilities. All right, so we already talked a little bit, hit on legitimacy at the earlier part of the training. But when we talk about legitimacy, there is legitimacy in policing, and then there is legitimacy in civilian oversight. And so when we think about legitimacy in policing, when a community views their police as legitimate, then they're more likely to view the police officers as trustworthy, honest, and concerned about the well-being of the people they deal with, the community members. They're more willing to accept police responsibility, more likely to accept police decisions and follow their directives and comply with the law and cooperate with police. So when there's a sense of legitimacy, whether it's real or perceived, these things are more likely to happen. If you all, as an oversight body, are doing your jobs right, you will have someone upset with you at some point in time. Community members, law enforcement, city, someone is going to be not happy with you, okay? Doesn't mean you've lacked legitimacy. As a matter of fact, that probably shows that you are legitimately doing what you're supposed to be doing, because you cannot satisfy everybody with what you're doing. So when it comes to these look very familiar, right? So when it comes to legitimacy and oversight, if the community perceives you to be legitimate, the community is more likely to view you as trustworthy, honest, and concerned about the well-being of the citizens of the community, accept your authority, accept your decisions and recommendations that you make as a result of reviewing cases, and they're more likely to cooperate with you, all right? So same thing, legitimacy in policing, legitimacy in your oversight, in your commission. All right, so what shapes legitimacy? Because it is important. I know earlier we talked about internal strife, potential internal strife or disagreements. All of that is natural for any group process that is forming or doing work. However, if it gets to a point where it's stalling the work and preventing you from getting the work done and moving forward, then you have an issue with your legitimacy. Because if the public sees that, then they're going to start to question, well, what are you doing? What's going on here, right? You all can't even get it together, in quotes. Okay, so what shapes legitimacy? When you're in oversight or whether you're in your policing, these are the foundational concepts around legitimacy. Being neutral. The work that you're doing, you're being as neutral and objective as possible, and you're making decisions with sound reasoning, okay? You're not making decisions out of your emotions, political ideology, or whatever it is. We all have all of those things. We're going to talk about biases tomorrow. We all have biases, but being able to recognize those things, set them aside, and being neutral and objective as possible is key. Treating everybody with respect and dignity. And so if someone files a complaint, when you're, well, you don't have a director now, but if the director is conducting interviews, whether it's with the police officer that is the subject of the complaint or the person who filed a complaint, treating everyone with dignity and respect is crucial. People know how they are being treated, and they respond to that. Voice, ensuring that people have a voice at the table, that they're being heard, is critical. You all as a commission are representative of the community in many ways, and so you do speak on some instances, speak on behalf or for the community, but when there are opportunities where they can have a voice at your table, that's important as well. And then trust. Decision makers convey trustworthy motives about those impacted by their decisions. So these four elements are crucial for when it comes to legitimacy in oversight and policing. And so when we think about legitimacy, there is statutory legitimacy, and then there's authority. There's statutory authority and then legitimacy-based authority. So of course, statutory authority is written, it's by law, it's by ordinance, right? The legitimacy piece is where I want you all to think about everything that you're doing, how you represent the commission, whether, formally, informally, social media, news interview, whatever it might be. if you keep in the forefront of your mind, whatever you say or what you do, how is this going to reflect on the legitimacy of this commission? It's going to be harder and more work if you lose legitimacy in the eyes of the public, all right? So, when it comes to, I know we've already talked a little bit about the desire or the interest in educating the community, not just on oversight, but some other issues as well that are relevant to civilian oversight. But the reality is there are practical issues. You all are a volunteer body, and so I'm sure many of you are working, if not all of you, but some of you are working. We all have families, we all have obligations. And so when you're thinking about what it is that you're able to do, keep in mind the feasibility and the practicality of it all. So legitimacy, one of the best ways you can establish legitimacy in the work that you're doing is to keep the mandates, what's outlined in the ordinance, keep those at the forefront of everything you're doing, okay? Whether it's community outreach, whether it's reviewing cases, whatever it might be. If you're doing the work, not getting bogged down in internal strife, coming to the table, being willing to understand and accept that we might have differences in opinions about these things among ourselves. We might have differences of opinions with the police department that we have oversight of. However, continue with the work, depersonalize all that stuff, act without emotion. Carry out your responsibilities as objectively as possible, keeping in mind always, what are you here to do? Why does this oversight body exist? Okay. Did you have a question or comment?
I have a question. Yeah, I think I appreciate that you bring up the fact that we're volunteers and that could make it difficult to implement some of these things, meaningfully. I just had a question about other oversight boards and whether you know if they're predominantly volunteer or whether there are cities that have full-time commissioners that are actually their employees or, this is exclusively what they do.
I will say for the most part, they're volunteers. And so there might be some that have paid, but by far, most are volunteers. And the larger cities that have multiple or the hybrid civilian oversight mechanisms in place, they have, even their boards are volunteer, but there might be an office of investigators that are the paid professionals. There might be an auditor who is a paid professional for the city, but typically, for the most part, boards and commissions are volunteers. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because to me that seems like it would undermine legitimacy. The fact that we're volunteers and we do this, once a month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it would be, people would be less willing to take what we do seriously because we're volunteers. And so, in the way that I see it, like, if a city wants to increase legitimacy of an oversight board, it would seem to be most productive to actually have people full-time doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I guess one way, the first thing I thought of when you said you might lack legitimacy because you're volunteers, conversely, people can say, wow, you're spending all this time doing this work and you're not even getting paid. And so that would show a commitment for every single one of you that you're putting towards this work. But I get what you're saying.
In terms of
Yeah.
the resources and the time that we can devote,
Mhm.
it seems like a hobby in some respects.
Yeah, so where there is money, if a board or commission, there's a budget involved, because most by far of boards and commissions are volunteer. But those that have a director of an oversight office where there is a budget, a line item budget in the city budget that goes towards that office, that's what I see more of if there's dedicated money to oversight. It's not, to pay the commissioners and boards, but I get what you're saying completely.
Are there any discussions that cities are having about instituting, an oversight board that this is their full-time job?
I'm not aware of any, but I have only been doing this for about a year and have only been getting my Google alerts for about 6 months. But, but now that you raise the question, I can be on the lookout for those, or even ask around if that's occurring anywhere, you know.
Well, isn't there the danger if the people are hired, then they're kind of placing their job at risk if they do something that isn't in line with what
True.
political, so to me, it makes more sense to be a volunteer. Because again, once you're paid, then there's that financial risk that you're taking by doing things that might not be popular.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm thinking about, if, I don't know if I mentioned this during that April training, but if you're not aware or not already on this listserv, NACOL does have a listserv that anyone can sign up on from online. You will be, you know, it'll take a day or two to be approved by the person who approves them all. But questions like what you just posed, is anyone out there considering, you know, who has paid commissioners or board members? We have, that listserv is very active, and so that's a question that I could see being posed on the listserv and people just responding to with what they know. I started, even though I've been working there almost a year now with NACOL, I started using the listserv only a few months ago, and I'm like, man, I should have started using this way back, because it is very active. There are a few thousand people on it, and so people are willing to jump in and respond all the time to questions that are posed. Yeah. Okay, so this slide, the parameters. So yes, we've covered a lot of community outreach and engagement ideas. As I started, not expecting you all to do everything under the sun, or even right now, because I know that you have to get staffed and some things underway before you can get to some of those other activities and efforts. So parameters refers to realistically what can you do, and we talked about what time commitment can you make, what are your resources, when can you have, when is the director going to be hired? So of course, all the practical things that make doing some of the things that we talked about feasible have come into play. Reach, that speaks to what are your authorities, and so you can refer back to your ordinance, right? What are you allowed to do? What are you mandated to do? And so keeping in mind those things, because this is a volunteer board, it may be for a while or forever that you're limited to doing what it is that you're mandated to do, as opposed to some of the other stuff that you would like to do that you don't have the time or the resources. Be very realistic and don't feel like you have to do it all. Perceptions, what does the community think you can do? And so where there are opportunities to inform, educate the community members about what it is that you do, because there are going to be some misconceptions about what you do. And also, oftentimes when there's an oversight agency or body in a city, the city believes that's going to solve all of our problems, right? And that is not the case. And so being clear as possible in whatever ways you can, and think about the website when you start developing that, but being very clear about what it is you have the authority to do and not do. And then communication, maintaining communication with the community and your other stakeholders, and making an effort to be as clear as possible about what you do, so that they have clear expectations about what you do. And then consistency, being consistent in how you're communicating, what it is that you do, the results of your reviews that you conduct, whether it's policy reviews or reviews of closed cases, but just being consistent in getting information out there, and also consistent in efforts to get input from the community members. So all of these sound pretty reasonable in, not rocket science, but they go a long way in establishing and maintaining the legitimacy. Communication is very key. I cannot stress that enough, whether it's law enforcement, community members, city council members, each other. That is really important. And then the last slide, I do this more so when I am about to do a strategic planning session, which we're not doing here tonight. So I just left that in there. But typically, when a board is is fully staffed and ready to start reviewing cases and thinking about the year ahead, I just go through an exercise where we actually come up with a plan, think about a year in advance. And I emphasize emphasize the feasibility, time, resources, and all that. All right, so the last module, identifying challenges and opportunities. You've heard me say this earlier tonight, I'll say it again. Throughout your process, once as you're working, reviewing cases, interacting with the various stakeholders of your office, think about why the commission was established. That should be your guiding principle, right? Why do you exist? Why are you here? A lot of it's stated in the ordinance itself, the mission, the purpose. And then think about what is it that the city wants from you, okay? And just values overall as a city and a community. And then what will your legacy be? You all are the first seated commissioners, is that correct, right? So I will say this. It's typical for the first set of commissioners or board members, you might at some point start to feel frustrated because you're not getting as much done as you would love to get done. It is a common place to be. There's a lot of groundwork to put into place before you can actually start doing the work. And I know with you all not having a director right now, then that is a little bit more of a delay for you. So I just want to encourage you, I understand the frustration and wanting to do a little bit more if that's how you're feeling. I don't want to assume that, but that is a common feeling I hear from boards that are just starting and haven't been able to start the work that they want to get to. But just know you will get to a point where you're doing that. And so when you do, or even at this point, think about what is the legacy that you all, as the first commissioners, would like to leave by the time you leave, okay? And so focus on that as well. Okay, so some of the common challenges, and I don't want to overwhelm you with this, but we do have to talk about challenges because, as I said before, if you're doing this right, someone is going to be upset with you at all times. Also, this is, you are a body where there are a lot of misconceptions about what it is that you do, who you are, what you're supposed to be, what you should be doing. The community is going to have a lot of opinions about all of those things. And so some of the challenges that you see here are some of the more common ones that we hear from the boards and commissions that we work with. Very high expectations. They think you are going to solve every problem that exists in this community and things are going to magically be better. That is not the case. The next slide is going to be how to turn these into opportunities and not just, this is what we're dealing with and this is it. Fear of change. Sometimes people fear what they don't know or what is new. And so with this being a newer body in the city, there can be some fear around what does this mean? Or from different segments of the community, okay? Community trauma. In a lot of cities, an oversight body is established as a result of something that has happened, some terrible incident, someone was harmed, someone was killed, a critical incident, and this is the result, or the oversight is established. And so even before something like that has happened, there are lots of segments in communities, I mean, research shows this for a century now at least, that there's a lot of trauma, especially in certain segments of the community. And so keeping all of that in mind, you're going to be dealing with people who have a lot of feelings around what it is that you're doing and policing in general. Skepticism from law enforcement. Law enforcement, we talked about this a little bit earlier, or just hit on it earlier, where there may be some misconceptions about who you are from law enforcement's perception. Some members of law enforcement may see you as anti-police and that you're out to get the cops, but that is not the case. But it is a reality that we see. Lack of understanding of oversight and its role, impartiality, legitimacy with both sides. We talked about legitimacy, right? And that's both sides referring to there may be some ideas about legitimacy for civilian oversight as well as policing, which you all have to work together. A need for training. Not every board and commission has the funds, the means to get the training that they need. That's a reality. Change can't wait. So this is something that's important. Sometimes there's a knee-jerk reaction or something has happened and there's a feeling like we have to do this, make these changes, get this work done right now. The danger in that comes when the groundwork hasn't been laid, the solid foundation to proceed with the work. And so a part of what you're going through as the first sitting commissioners, you're going through that process right now, trying to lay the groundwork. And I know some of the things that need to be done are beyond your control. So I just want to reiterate, I encourage you, like, don't give up, don't feel frustrated. This is something that I see with other boards as well. But just know, going too fast before the groundwork is laid, can actually have negative repercussions in the long run and damage the work that you could be doing in the long run. Attempting to meet all the demands, you will not meet everyone's demands that they have of you, and then some stakeholders think others cannot be engaged. So the challenging thing about civilian oversight is, of course, there are so many different opinions about policing civilian oversight in the community, and everyone who's involved has to be willing to come to the table if the work is going to get done. And that is easier said than done, because each of you are in control of your own thoughts and ideas, but there are thousands of people out there that are responsible for their own ideas and thoughts and willingness to come to the table and be open to agree to disagree on some things in order to get the work done. Okay. So those challenges, though, they can sound overwhelming, and sometimes they can feel overwhelming as well. But you all as the first commissioners have an opportunity to turn some of those challenges into opportunities and lay some of the groundwork for the future of the oversight body, right? So we've already talked about some of the training and increasing awareness and educating the community and different stakeholders, whether it's training at the police department, educating community members about what you're doing. You have the opportunity to do that so that people have accurate information and a better understanding of what civilian oversight is and what your body does. Engaging all stakeholders. You have the opportunity to start building the bridges and creating the relationships in that regard with police departments, with nonprofit agencies, with potential collaborators about what resources there are in the community. Also, you said you're a researcher and you bring up research a lot. Like if there's universities in the areas where there are scholars or professors who are doing research in some area that is related to oversight, that's also a potential collaboration right there that could be helpful in educating the community. Improving policy and procedures, one of the things you're tasked with is reviewing policies, and so there's an opportunity for you all to do that and make recommendations. Cultivating government support by virtue of working with city council and different other municipal officials. You're doing that by virtue of just the work that you're doing and the good relationships that you establish there. Responding to calls for reform, oftentimes that is coming from the community. And that is oftentimes why some cities actually have oversight, because that was a call and spearheaded by community members. So there's an opportunity to be involved and receive input from the community as you're carrying out your mandates. Centering the most impacted. Again, a lot of oversight bodies are formed in a lot of cities because of something that has happened in the community that affects the most impacted among the community members.
I have a question on that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think, what would you recommend in how the commission should move forward in terms of addressing some of these challenges? So the reason why, when you initially started the presentation, the training about how do we define community and who's the community at need, the reason I brought this up is because there is a difference in priorities, right? And so that different in priority impacts then the work because you have a different priority in mind. And I'm wondering, because of legitimacy, how, I know that the commission can work together, right? It's not, I don't question that we cannot. But do you suggest that you've seen from others that that type of open forum should be in a meeting, that type of discussion, or should that be a special meeting that the commission should have, the commissioner should have? Because I do think that that is one of the biggest concerns on my end, and that we need to have that conversation.
You mean the conversation on what community is, how to define that?
Yeah, so for example, to me, the community that is the most impacted, and I'll speak from my own individual perspective, is the reason why this commission was established, right?
Mhm.
We know that historically what has happened, we know the neighborhoods that this impacts. And sometimes there, in comments or suggestions on policy moving forward, the suggestions tend to be punitive rather than positive or effective. And I think that can be very harmful because that takes away the legitimacy of the commission, right? The commission was established to have an oversight and to improve relationships with Savannah PD.
Mhm.
And by suggesting punitive, antiquated policies that don't work, in fact, harm communities, that's taking away the legitimacy of the commission.
Mhm.
And so that conversation needs to happen. And I'm wondering whether you recommend that that conversation should happen in an open forum in a meeting like this,
Mhm.
or should that conversation happen as a special meeting so that we can work better together to establish legitimacy?
I'm writing my notes so I don't forget. So I see a couple of layers there. And so one is if there's a difference in, or the discussion needs to happen, I see one conversation between the different, whoever the groups are that have different ideas of what the community is.
Sorry, if I could just ask a clarifying question.
Yes.
By special meeting, do you mean like a closed meeting that is not open to the public?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
And I would just jump in for a minute there because this may sort of short circuit and answer the question. We have to remember too that we can only participate in closed sessions with regard to a very limited number of categories. And so I don't necessarily know, Commissioner Mejia, if what you're suggesting would fall into any of those categories. I can't think of one off the top of my head, which would mean that it would likely, if something of that nature were to make it onto an agenda, it would likely need to be on an agenda for open session.
That's what I was thinking too. I was curious about whether we could even have a closed meeting with regard to a topic like that.
Okay, so let me just clarify to make sure I understand. It could not be, did you say it, there are certain categories where you could have closed meetings?
Correct. So
Okay.
under the Brown Act, there is a limited amount of topics that can be discussed in closed session.
Okay,
And I
Which-
didn't,
Sorry.
I just to finish, I didn't foreclose the possibility that that is one. I just said I don't believe it is, but
Mhm.
I would need to clarify that.
okay,
But I think for the sake of argument, I would assume that it's not a category. It's not a topic that would fall under a permissible closed session item.
okay,
And I was just gonna add that I think that's one of the complexities for our particular oversight board, and I guess any California oversight board, is that the Brown Act is a California, it's a statute that was passed in California, so there might not be an equivalent statute in other states.
yeah, there's,
And so it does make it difficult to have these kinds of conversations as commissioners, because technically every conversation that we have about business is supposed to be open to the public.
right. So I feel like I'm having a hard time giving a recommendation, because I feel like there's a lot of context, that I don't have. But I will say, maybe not necessarily defining what community is, but other sensitive topics. I have been actually during a training, which, like yours, was a public meeting and it was being live streamed. And there was a topic that was brought up that was pretty contentious, and they had kind of given me a heads up before I went to the training, or actually even arrived in the city to do the training. I was given a heads up that this can be an issue. And in fact, they did have a discussion towards the end of the day of training, and it was a public discussion because it was a public meeting, and so it was streamed. So I don't know if I have a recommendation about what is the best setting for it, because I don't know who all would be involved. I don't know if it's a larger community conversation. So, no, okay, so, oh,
It's
okay.
an internal commissioners, conversation that needs to be had within the commission.
Okay, and is this a disagreement among, or everyone has strong opinions about it, or feel like they should be a part of it? I'm seeing some no, like,
Can I interject something real quick? I've been through the ethics training for several commissions I've been on, and it's explicit in there that you have to be non-biased, nonpartisan. So, yeah, we're all coming here with different backgrounds. You can't eliminate that. So in my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, I don't care what your background is, if you're living up to your obligation, I took an oath to do this, I have an obligation morally and fiscally to be non-biased and non-prejudicial. I don't know what else I can do. You know what I'm saying? We can talk about it all you want, but again, I made a solemn oath to do my job. So if I'm gonna take my position seriously, which I think we all should, and that does add legitimacy to the whole process, then you have to be non-biased. I don't care what your background is. If you're coming in here with preconceived ideas, then you're not living up to your oath of office. You've got to be non-biased. That's your obligation here. And you've mentioned that early on in this training, just today. So if you can't get around that, you know, I don't know how you could get around that, right? That's something you have to solve internally, in my opinion. Discussing it with everybody is still gonna be an internal decision, but again, my obligation to the community and to the police department is to be non-biased. I took an oath to do that, and that's what I intend to do. So I don't know if that helps answer anything or not, but my ethics training, that's what we did. Thank you.
Yeah, my concern is not about biases. I mean, it plays a role into biases, but I completely understand, I study that, about implicit and non-implicit and systemic. That's different. That is not why this conversation needs to happen. It actually falls within the parameters of what the commission should and should not be doing. And so I've brought this up to Jonathan before, to agendize this item. And what the issue is, if within our parameters in the ordinance, it states that we should be encouraging to have positive relationships of policing as well as ensuring an oversight. Those are the parameters. However, there are comments that often negate that, and instead, what is said is to do more policing in punitive matters, which is problematic. That's the conversation I'm talking about, not about biases. We all have individual perspectives and experiences and knowledge, or lack of knowledge. So what I'm talking about is about what's within our parameters. And when you have this difference, right, that you're following the ordinance, however, even when it's in the ordinance, this is happening in the background. And that can create illegitimacy from the public. If you are here as commissioners to ensure that you are representing the community unbiased as you can be, and yet the direction is punitive, how are you serving the community is my question. And that's a conversation that we need to have.
If I could ask a question, can you clarify what you mean by conversations or recommendations that were made that
Yeah.
were punitive? Just, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't know if this is something that came up.
Yeah, I wasn't at the last meeting. It's been several meetings. So I can point out to two examples. So there was the tagging, right? The issue about tagging, and then the recommendation was that the police should be arresting individuals who are tagging when research shows otherwise. then there's also the conversation when we're talking about the youth and recommendation of back in the day, things were being done of like charging families and things like that. Those are harmful to community members. Those are not effective. And when people and commissioners make those statements, those are punitive. They're not positive in the ordinance of even encouraging, right? And my concern is that I completely agree. We need to work with the police department. And as someone who's born and raised here, I've seen the changes in the police department, right? I've seen the improvements of what used to happen back in the 90s. So to make those type of remarks in directions, whether they're taken or not, are harmful because we're also taking away the possibility of all the growth that the PD has done, and instead encouraging problematic practices. And so again, this is not about, it has to do with biases, but it has to do with the parameters, what we can do as well.
Thank you. This conversation really makes me think that I'm not trying to give direction, but makes me think that we do, as a commission, perhaps need some type of work study session on the historical context of policing in Santa Ana. And I think that to have a foundation and a place of why this police commission came about. Because I think it's been several decades on issues of trust with police that have arisen that really got us to this point. And I think that having some type of work study session and historical context on that would allow us to really ground things on facts. I think the second one, which it really piqued my mind, intrigued my mind, what you mentioned regarding strategic plans and perhaps having the commission go through some type of planning. I think that the issue that Commissioner Mejia and myself have raised in the past as well has been that it is the approach that the commission needs to have to the issues, or whether it is policies and procedures, whether it's recommendations, it has to be based on data, what the data tells us, and also based on the experiences of those communities that have been the most impacted by policing. And so I think that the commission might benefit, in my opinion, and kind of like trying to see what you think on that as well, and if you've seen those as well, but really having the commission have a robust discussion, planning around setting goals that we want to do over the next 2 to 3 years, but that are based on research and data and that are within the parameters of oversight. Because I think that we're new, we're the first batch of commissioners. There's a lot of things that can go sideways, but I really want to ground, and I think that what Commissioner Mejia has been also cautioning has been around giving direction or going to conversations that are not research based. And so I think that those are just some thoughts that I have, but I also want to hear if you have seen similar challenges. I mean, I know that other cities have had longer history around policing and reconciliation that needs to happen there, even before an oversight entity gets established. And even with an oversight entity, there's reconciliation that needs to happen around historical harms. But then again, that we also have, we're shifting. There's the approach to policing keeps evolving from where it was now to what it is now. But then until what is now, and a lot of it has been because the research tells us that certain things are not working, and I think perhaps that's where we need to really have all of us have conversations on that. Now, can we agendize that? I think that even there's questions around what the ordinance allows us to do or not, but even that's another set of conversation. But those are just my thoughts on this.
So as you all, I listened to everything everyone was saying, and one of the things that comes to my mind is that working in a group is difficult. I don't know if you all knew each other before you met on this commission. I'm seeing a lot of nopes. And so you've got 7 people who came together with your own experiences, your own family backgrounds, your own identities, your own everything. And you are being asked to carry out some tasks as the first set of commissioners for this oversight body. And a part of every single group, this is, if you've ever studied group work, group dynamics, is, I'm seeing it like playing out right in front of me. There is a series of phases that any group goes through when they are formed. And a part of some of those phases are getting to know people, their personalities, their communication styles. You're in a formal setting, informal roles, and on top of that, everything is public. Everyone who wants to tune in is seeing and listening to everything that you're doing, which can make it a little more challenging. So a part of the group process and group dynamics is figuring out who in the world are these other people that are in the group with me. And so it can be a little challenging, because when you don't know someone very well, there can be some tentativeness about expressing yourself, or conversely, there can be sharing information without having an understanding of the way other people communicate and receive information and how it might impact them, whether it's triggering, whether they feel it's disrespectful, whether they agree with you. You just don't really know who these other commissioners are. I know you all have been meeting for a little bit now, but you really don't know everything about the other person. And so, from what I can pick up about the idea about community and being punitive as opposed to being more, I think of restorative justice as more of what I'm hearing in some cases. But I like the idea of providing some education. Now, I don't know if that's what you all will ultimately do, but I do think, going back to when I was talking about, well, how do you form good relationships with police officers, right? Sometimes it's learning about what they do outside of work on those ride-alongs. Sometimes it's, finding out something about them personally when you're doing a collaborative training and 10 minutes afterwards you're talking, hey, that went well, and then all of a sudden, yeah, I got to go home and pick up my kid. And then you have to start having a conversation about their child and your child. And so the more you all have an understanding about your backgrounds that you bring to the work that you're doing and how it can influence what you're doing, how it can impact your interactions with your other commission members, I think I like the idea of doing that. Now, it's totally up to you whether you do that or not. I will say, when I have seen something similar to providing an education, like the history of policing in a particular community, when I've seen that done in an open meeting, the benefit is that the public hears that information as well. I have also seen the meeting that I just referenced a few minutes ago, like, oh, they took it there when I was doing the training in this public meeting, like they had the hard conversation. After that meeting ended, a couple of the board members, who I would say were the ones with the most diverging thoughts and were the two that kind of butted the heads the most on that board, they stayed back and informally had a conversation. Just two people who are serving on that panel, talking about the training, the information they received during the day, and how it did make them look at what they were doing and how they were communicating, which was not the best of ways, but it made them look at things differently. So by virtue of training, it happened to be a different type of training, but it prompted them to examine themselves and then have a conversation just between the two of them, which ultimately was beneficial for the workings of the board. So I understand that a part of this is official board or commission business, but I'm also hearing, if I'm honest, there's like a little digging in the heels of positions, and a little misunderstanding maybe is in there as well. I'm not pointing at anybody, just kind of. So I do like the idea, like if there's an issue with an understanding of what community means and is in this community, then it could be helpful to have an understanding of the history specific to this community. We don't all know everything about everything, everybody. We're limited in a lot of ways, no matter how much we actively seek out information. It's just too much out there for us to be able to get it all. But if you're aware of something like the history of this community, in relation to the work that you're doing in oversight, in relation to the work that policing has had on the community, I think that makes a lot of sense to go over that.
Would that be an agendized item? Can we make it an agendized item?
There's been a lot of concepts back and forth about what to agendize. So to be clear, are we talking about an agendizing an item involving the historical policing in Santa Ana? Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
that's correct. The historical, historical policing of Santana as it relates to, the leading up to the Police Oversight Commission. I think I'll add that.
Are you able to speak to?
Just trying to gather, if you can specifically say, when you say historical policing strategies, or what in general are you asking that you
I'm thinking more with the critical lens of historical interactions and policing as it relates to young people, Latinos, API communities, around immigration. I'm even wondering if this is something perhaps we can request the city to seek outside the city as,
If I may, this is an area where I've seen presentations done for oversight boards or hosted by oversight boards or discussions facilitated. This is where people who do research in the area have been very helpful, as well as people, I'll just say this, people who have studied it and have done research on it and are very well versed. And they're not expressing opinions. They're expressing, these are the facts. This is the reality of what happened in this community. And this is what led to where we are today with an oversight commission. So just when I mentioned universities nearby, that's also, these days there's virtual stuff too, but I find people who have done research in that area to be very helpful when it comes to explaining things.
I will leave the discussion at this, is that in terms of the question, can that be agendized? Is it within the parameters of the ordinance? Yes, I believe it is. I believe that a historical analysis of the policing in Santa Ana within some relevant time frame and how we ended up where we are here is within the parameters of the ordinance, and I would be happy and open to put it on the agenda. That said, I don't personally know anybody who could provide such a history. We can talk to staff to see. I would venture to guess that the prevailing viewpoint may be that such a training or a seminar or a work study session should be put on by somebody outside potentially the city, maybe more of an academic, and we can certainly discuss that at a later point. I don't know that it's appropriate to discuss that in full here, but to answer the question, I'm open to the idea. It can be agendized, it's within the statute, but we need to nail down some details on that and hammer those things out before we just, I just go, Commander, can you provide somebody, or Commissioner, are you able to provide somebody? I think that we need to look into that a little bit.
Yeah, and I was thinking more within the realm of academia. I think we have really great universities around here that have professors that might specialize in this matter.
The history of Santa Ana Police Department, like when it started back in the 1800s, or are you talking about further on?
More relevant, more recently, I'm thinking more, I mean, we look at time periods of the 1960s, 70s onward, where a lot of the critical issues on policing and different communities came to be about. I think that's a good, I think that's a good time frame. You know, I can tell you, for example, from my personal interest in this, that's all about, for all of us to get some context will be around policing and immigrant communities over the last 30 years, which prompted several policy changes in the city around the way that police interacts with ICE and things of that nature. So just in terms of a time frame, I'm hoping to look into the last 60, 50 years, it's because things start from a root cause. But yeah, I do believe we can find folks. I think that I don't think it's just gonna be one person, to be honest, because we're talking about just different segments of the community in Santa Ana that have different experiences with policing in Santa Ana, and I think that might require like some type of combination of academic brains.
Do any of you here know where the very first jail was for Santa Ana? 1884, I believe it was. Downtown 4th Street, Brenner's Department Store basement. And the key to it is up in the 4th floor of the police chief, in the museum up there that I helped start with my cousin, whose uncle, my mother's brother, was a chief of captain of the detectives here in Santa Ana back in the 30s and 40s. So I can take you way back.
Yeah, and
Not to the 1800s, but to that. But anyway, that's interesting. That's history of Santa Ana, how the department got started. That was the first jail.
Yeah, and I would agree with Commissioner Perea that rather than a history of Santa Ana, it's a history of policing, which is a different conversation. And so, which is what we need to have.
Well, this is the history of the police department.
Correct,
That's
yeah.
how it was started, and when I was, born and raised here, so I've been here a long time. And I can remember when the police department put up with problems when they were on down Sycamore Street, I think, was a police department was down there. I can remember they were there. They were on 3rd and Main Street, what used to be the water department, and that was the police department at one time. They kept all the cars downstairs in the basement, and they come zipping out onto the top onto 3rd Street, and away they went.
Yeah, I don't think that information is going to be as helpful for us to come together as commissioners and understand community. I think policing is different than police department. That the policing as in the way that the police department polices community. And so I think that's both gang involved, hot policing, the immigrant community. That's what I think the conversation should be. And it should be, and I have options for academics that I can send you. And I think that also from the community members, so like the community organizations that requested and pushed for this is going to be helpful too.
Excuse me. Are you familiar with the COP program for Santa Ana? It was started back in the early 70s, or late 70s, I think, 75, 77. Are you familiar with community-oriented policing, how that was started here? And
Yes.
that's where the police got involved with the people, with the neighborhoods. And so that whatever information the police department had, they could bring to the neighborhoods. Whatever the problems the neighborhoods had, they could bring with the police. That's how we got to know each other. And these two officers here, I heard tonight. He says, "Don't you remember how you knew me?" Okay, they used to come to my house for meetings, for the COP meetings. That was back in the 70s, probably. 70s or 80s, maybe the 80s, I'm not sure. It started back in the 70s. But those are interesting things for the people to know how that got started, how the police wanted to be involved with the communities and with the neighborhoods to get to know them, and so that the community would also get to know the police officers that are in their neighborhoods, and that way it could communicate back and forth. And that started a lot of good rapport with each other, with the police and with the community. Those are things you should remember to learn about, look into.
Commissioners, if I may, I've taken in what everybody has suggested and weighed on with this particular topic. As I said, I believe it's within the scope of the ordinance. I will take the recommendations. I will speak to all of you at different times, get some feelings, get some input, and we'll come up with an agenda item, okay? And we'll go ahead and move forward.
Thank you.
All right, and then we saw this slide before, but opportunities, just reiterate, you will come across challenges. That is the nature of doing this work. As long as this commission exists, once you are long gone, the sitting commissioners will still have some of the challenges that they will be working on. It is a rare event that any board or commission does not have a challenge that they're working on, or multiple. But the idea is, look at them as what can we do with these, what can we do with the challenges we have, and turn them into opportunities, educating people, building better police community relations, improving, policies. So think of what it is that you can do. And then the last slide, I believe, goes back to the feasibility of it all. There's a lot that I know you all will want to do and wish you could do, and want to do it faster than you are able to do. But the reality is, that there are limitations, resources, staff-wise, and other time. Time is so essential. But just know, when it comes to the point where you are planning, like for the year ahead, what it is that you want to focus on, the goals, a strategic planning of sorts. Just keep in mind the feasibility of doing everything that you want to do, and going back to prioritizing. That's going to be a part of the strategic planning. And so there's when you get to that point, there is going to have to be consensus, because you all are working as a team on what it is that you want to focus on and accomplish. And that's it. So, final questions, comments?
So my no more questions from me, but my comment is thank you. I appreciate you for coming down here and providing us with this training, and I think it really prompted very much needed conversations, or started very needed conversations I think all of us have been wanting to have. So I appreciate it.
Glad to hear that. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me, having me.
Thank you so much. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That concludes our work study session, so we move on to comments, staff comments.
I would like to personally thank Tina Barr for coming all the way out from the East Coast for just a very robust, informative, holistic, just such a well-balanced training session. I really appreciate it, and I know that everybody here did as well, so thank you. I know that there may have been some raised eyebrows when I scheduled this special session back-to-back with the regular session. I want to assure you that is because I did not want to waste an opportunity to have a second day with Tina here, because otherwise it would have just been one day on the regular session. I figured if she's going to be out, let's go ahead and get a couple sessions in while we have her, and she did such a fantastic job. I'm excited to see the implicit bias training tomorrow night.
And I remember during that April meeting, you all wanted more training, so. You wanted more training.
Careful what you wish for, right?
I will have a meeting in the city manager's office tomorrow at 6 o'clock. It's only scheduled to go from 6 to 7. Senior Assistant City Attorney Tamara Bogosian will be filling in for me during that period of time. As soon as I'm done with that meeting, I plan to come down and finish up the implicit bias training.
Any further staff comments? Okay, we shall move on to commissioner comments, and we'll start on my left with Commissioner Sayed.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Barr. That was really informative. I think, it is difficult to work with people with different backgrounds. I frankly don't know anyone on this commission. I don't know where any of you have come from. I don't know your police interactions. I don't know if you've done the ride-alongs. I don't know anything. And similarly, I think there's maybe preconceived notions about me and where I come from and things like that. But it would be great if we had an opportunity to get to know each other more without violating the Brown Act. Maybe like a bonding experience. I don't know. But that's just something I want to put out there, because I think if we can, even with our differences, work together to make everyone in all of our wards feel like they're being heard, and feeling like the police are protecting all of us, and not feeling like there's this antagonistic relationship, I'm willing to do whatever to get to that goal. So However we can do it, I'm happy to do it.
I think through a ropes course would be helpful. Just kidding.
UCI does have that, you know. I'm very competitive, just kidding. Yeah, I just want to echo the same thoughts. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really wonderful. I think that it was a very much needed discussion, and I really appreciate all the guidance and opportunity, also just like facilitating the conversation. I will be missing, unfortunately, the presentation tomorrow. I'm on vacation tomorrow, but I'm glad I made it for today. And I agree. I hope that we all can work together. I know that we can, and I look forward for us to getting to that point.
Well, looking forward to hang out with folks tomorrow again. And I did see the recommendations is to have snacks during public hearings. And I'll reiterate my hope to have that in the future. On a serious note, the issue with the independent oversight director, I encourage all of us to continue reaching out to the council members that appointed us, to remind them to move on their end on the oversight director process, so that way we can at least know that is moving. But yeah, I'll see you all tomorrow.
Your microphone, please.
I just want to reiterate what everyone else here has said. Thank you so much for coming again. I found last month's meeting to be extra interesting for me, anyway, and I could put two and two together with some of the things that I learned there. And you've added a lot tonight with it, so it's really been, especially the last 2 months, I think have been extra interesting to me, anyway. I know a lot about the background of the police and everything, and the city and stuff like that, and this is adding to it. You know, like I say, I enjoy hearing it again. So thank you so much. Welcome to California. Welcome to the West Coast and our fires and our heat and everything. Huh? You think it's beautiful here right now? It is here in Santa Ana. Yeah, weather's better. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. Really enjoyed your presentation. I just want to say that, I think it's a strength that we all have differing perspectives. I don't know what everybody's perspectives are. I don't know. I don't know about anything about anyone's background. But I think it makes us stronger as an oversight board to have differing viewpoints, because it means that as a commissioner, I might learn some things that I wasn't aware of before, joining the commission. I think it's really important, though, that we all keep an open mind in order to fully maximize the value that we can get from having differing perspectives. But as a whole, I really see that as a positive, and that's all I'll say. Thank you.
And I would agree with Commissioner Castillo a lot. And it is important, yeah, we all do have different backgrounds, and it is important to have that mixing of everything. We're not all going to agree. That's just a fact of life. But again, I would like to yeah, anyway, you get it. The ethics training, I think it's, again, you have a moral and civil obligation to be non-biased. And again, I thank you for the training, and I thank everybody for being here and their input. And if there's no further comments, we'll adjourn the meeting until tomorrow, August 8th at 5 p.m. Thank you
I'd
again.
like to point out one thing too, I'm gonna be quick, and that is, tomorrow, at the completion of that training, will mark the end of required training. So I think that's a big milestone, and we'll celebrate then, but that's a big milestone, and you should all be really proud and accomplished, and I could not be more grateful to this amazing staff that we have to the left here, and Karen, Elizabeth, Commander Lopez, Roland Andrade down there. He snuck in there halfway through, like I wasn't gonna notice. And I just want to also thank staff. They've just been amazing, and with that, we can adjourn.
Mine's off. I don't know.
Mine's on. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I just, before we conclude, I also want to reiterate what Commissioner Said said about getting to know each other as individuals outside of the commission. I think that would be really beneficial. And so I second that notion, and that's it. Thank you.
I think we're adjourned now. Thank you.